That's the feeling we've all had. How new shoes would make you glad, but the best times you recall when you wore no shoes at all. Back the days.
Hey there, and welcome to another edition of Living Lightly. Today I'm going to be talking to you about getting some garden starts going in the spring in a more sustainable way. I shot most of the footage for this video last year, about a year ago, and so my hair is a little bit longer. I've since cut my hair off, but I had all this footage and I didn't quite finish the video last year, so I just finished the last little bits of it, and so that's what I've got for you today.
As part of my sustainable life, I like to grow as much of my own food as possible. If you want to grow long-season tropical vegetables like tomatoes and peppers and maximize the length of their season, you have to get starts. Living at Dancing Rabbit Eco Village, one of our covenants requires us to follow organic farming standards. It can be difficult to find organic starts in many parts of the country. You might have to resort to ordering them through the mail, which means more food miles and possibly not getting the starts when you want them. I began raising my own starts because when I bought starts, I'd always end up with a bunch of disposable plastic trays that had to be thrown out. I also started saving seeds and found that starting my own plants was the only way to grow the heirloom varieties I'd saved seeds of. Growing your own vegetable starts isn't as difficult as it may seem. I started out buying seed starting mix at the store and reusing disposable trays I'd get from buying starts, or I'd scavenge trays from other gardeners. I eventually learned that the store-bought soil mix was fortified with a chemical fertilizer and that the plastic trays would split and quickly become useless, as well as spread disease from season to season. In recent years, I've been mixing up my own soil mix, and I've started using a pretty handy tool called a soil blocker that eliminates the need for plastic cell trays. Today, I'm going to be showing you how I grow my own starts more sustainably using homemade soil mix and soil blocks.
These soil blockers come in different sizes, and I've got the smallest size and then the next size up. And I really like these small blocks because I do a lot of seed saving, and some of my seeds are many years old and have low germination rates. So the great thing about these small blocks is that you can plant maybe one or two seeds in each of these little blocks, and then if any of the seeds don't come out, you just take those blocks and you can remix them into your soil mix, and the ones that do germinate and do well, you can take those plants and then drop them in to these larger blocks. And the larger blocks, I bought these little attachments, and those create a little divot or a little space in the larger blocks that perfectly fits one of these smaller blocks. So it's easy transplanting. You don't have to repot anything, remix the soil. You just make some of these larger blocks, and then you can just drop the smaller blocks right into the larger blocks, and they'll just start growing and spread their roots into these larger blocks in no time, and makes transplanting super easy. Now, one of the things you have to be aware of these smaller blocks is that they can dry out pretty quickly. So you have to just keep on top of them and make sure that they don't dry out. Usually when I'm planting in a large flat like this, I won't even plant seeds in the outer row because these ones will all dry out faster than the ones on the inner blocks, and you'll get really low germination if you plant into those because they just you won't be able to keep them moist enough. So that's just something to be aware of when you're using these small blocks. The larger blocks don't seem to have the same problem of drying out quickly. Now I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about the trays that I use for my starts. I got these trays from Johnny's Seeds, and they are made for soil blocks. So the size of them fits an exact number of the smaller soil blocks, and then also fits an exact number of the larger soil blocks. So they're kind of convenient in that way. They're durable, and I can reuse them season to season if I wash them out to clean them of disease. And I find they're really useful. So they can hold up the weight of even these larger soil blocks. One of the main ingredients in my soil mixture is coco coir. I think that's how you pronounce it. And it comes in these compact blocks. And it's actually a waste material from various coconut products, and it's a great replacement for peat moss, which is mined from peat bogs, which supposedly is somewhat sustainable, but I think it's much better to use a waste product like coco coir instead of peat. So I got these, and it's also great because it's compacted so much. Like there's this block that you get, and it's probably about as much material as you'd get in a large brick of peat moss. And it's just all compacted. The thing is, when you get it, you have to sort of chip off parts of it, and that's why I use this little hatchet usually, and I've already done that to chip off parts, but you have to soak it in water to get it to rehydrate and then become sort of crumbly and a good consistency for mixing into your soil mix. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm going to add some water, and you just have to keep on adding the water until it soaks it all up, and it should be fairly dry, not totally dry, but moist, but not so that when you squeeze it, you're getting a lot of moisture coming out. That's about the consistency that you want it to be. So you might have to leave it for like an hour or two to soak up the water, so you want to plan that into your timing of your seed starts. You can see this part of it is still totally dry, so that still has to take up some water. So I'm going to just set this to soak, and then we'll come back to it and see how it looks, and I'll keep on adding more water to it as it takes up the water. The soil mix that I use is composed of 4 different ingredients. The first one is my sifted compost, and I've been making this over the last couple of years. And one thing that's great about my compost is sometimes I have leftovers from natural building projects, and if I'm making earth and plaster, it consists of sand and clay, slaked clay. And so I end up getting sand mixed into my compost, and also all those minerals, great minerals that are in clay that are kind of hard to incorporate into your soil sometimes because they're found farther down in the soil and it's usually thick. But when you mix it in with from plaster, it's already been sort of separated and it mixes into your compost really easily with the sand. So it's sort of a fortified compost, fortified with minerals. This is some ag lime, basic ag lime, and I got this through a local ag product distributor, MFA. And then this is some sifted wood ash, just from my wood stove. So that is high in calcium and potassium, potash. So that's a great ingredient. Both of these I add in small amounts. And then the last ingredient in my soil mixture is the coco coir. Okay, so we are ready to mix up our soil mix here. We're going to start with the coco coir, and I've got a 3-quart bowl here I'm using to measure out the proportions of the ingredients of the soil mix. I use 1-to-1 coco coir to compost, and then I put in a small amount of the other ingredients, the potash, the wood ash, and the crushed limestone. So we'll start with putting the coco coir in there, partly because it's the drier ingredient, and putting the compost in on top of it makes it easier to incorporate the compost, since the compost is much wetter. So those 2 ingredients in there, set that aside, and then I'm going to put just a couple of tablespoons, kind of heaping tablespoons of wood ash, which has potassium in it, and planting things like tomatoes like potassium, and then a couple of sort of heaping tablespoons of the crushed limestone. And then we're just going to mix that together in here, and it looks like it's going to end up a little bit dry, so we're going to want to put some water in here as well. You know, I've read about different recipes for soil mixes that include like green sand and other minerals like rock phosphate or whatever. I've found that just putting these simple ingredients in is fine, and all my starts grow really well. I haven't ever had a problem with them growing vigorously. So I think the compost itself has enough nutrients in it to really supply the plants with what they need. Let's add a little bit of water to this because you can see it's kind of a little bit crumbly. You really want it to be to the level of where if you squeeze a handful of it, you can see some of the water coming out of it. So it has to be moist enough in order to really get packed into the soil blocker well, and also to hold its shape when it comes out of the soil blocker, because if it's too dry it'll just sort of fall apart. It looks like we're getting some pretty good amount of water coming out when we squeeze it. I'm just going to do a couple of examples of and show you how I fill these soil blocks with soil and how you can get a good block out of each one, and make sure that you get a full block that's intact and not going to crumble apart when it comes out of the soil blocker. Now, with this small one, I find you really have to stick your thumb into each little cell to pack the soil in. It's not the easiest way to do it, and it's not the fastest. Like, I think the idea of these soil blockers is you're supposed to be able to just push them into the soil and the soil will fill up the blocker, but I don't ever find that it does that. It doesn't do a good job of really filling the blocker. So I take the time and just push in with my thumbs to make sure that I get a full intact block and that it's pretty well compacted, and that I don't have to worry about them falling apart. And each one has a little dimple in it, and that's where you drop the seeds. So if you don't pack the soil properly into the mold, you're not going to end up with those dimples there. I don't know how much of a difference that would make, but it's kind of nice to have the little dimples there. And then these larger blocks, the same thing. I think you can push these into the soil pretty well and get them fairly well filled up, especially if you're like working on a concrete surface and you've just got a bunch of soil there. It's pretty easy to push down against the concrete. It's not as easy to push down against a big pile of soil. So just push the soil down into these, make sure they're filled up, because I've got those little smaller soil plastic blocks in here that are creating the indentation where the smaller soil block can fit. So I've got to fill up around the sides of that. So I just push the soil down in there, and you're going to squeeze a couple of times to sort of get it to slide out and loosen. You can also dip your soil blocker in water to make it much more slippery, because you'll get soil caking up on the sides depending on the consistency of your soil mix. But that will make it a lot easier to get the soil blocks to slide out. Okay, so you can see I've finished filling up this flat with soil blocks, small soil blocks. And today I'm going to be planting some tomato seeds. These are mostly heirloom varieties that I saved seeds of. So this is green zebra seed from 2010. So it's pretty old, likely to have low germination, but the viability of tomato seeds is around 5 years, so I should be able to get some germination off of these. But we're just putting a couple seeds in each of the little depressions in the soil block. And it's pretty simple. Like I said, the benefits of these smaller soil blocks is that I can plant a lot of seeds and get some germination out of them, not have to take up a whole lot of space in my flats finding out which seeds are viable. And I'm going to avoid planting in the outer row because I'm concerned about those being drier cells and not getting good germination. So this green zebra tomato, I figure I'll plant a couple of rows of it right now. So I planted a full flat and then part of this one. This one has mostly flowers in it and a few early season cabbages. One thing to remember when you're planting seeds in these flats of small trays especially is to draw yourself a little map, and usually I number the map and then put the number in tape on the side so that I know also the orientation of the rows, and I plant in rows. So I've got cabbages here, and this is calendula, cleomes here, and some other flowers over here. Now I'm just going to cover them with a mixture, a dry mixture of the soil mix. And we're just going to cover them on top here because that's pretty much, these have such a small depression in the small soil blocks that really you can't cover it with a small amount of soil. So you pretty much just have to put a layer about 1/4 of an inch deep across the entire flat. So evenly cover it and then tamp it down. And since I didn't plant in the outer ring of little soil blocks, I won't necessarily try to get it covering all of those as well. I find having a loose, drier layer on top here is a good way to get good germination, because the seeds themselves are getting enough water from the bottom, and if you try to put the wet soil on top, it's too clumpy. It won't spread evenly like the dry soil mix does. So I'll probably be planting some more stuff over here in the near future. And now we'll put this in the germination chamber, and I can go upstairs and show you the germination chamber that I made myself. It's very simple, low power option. Since I'm off the grid here, I need something that doesn't use a lot of power, like a heat element. All right, so this is the germination chamber I was talking about. It's just a simple box made out of plywood, and then I've got 1/4 inch plywood in here for the shelves. I can fit 5 flats in here, and it operates with I think this is a 40 watt incandescent light bulb, and I've got it on a timer so that it turns off periodically, but overall maintains the temperature in the box. And we can just slide these ones up in here near the top. And actually, I'm going to turn this around so I can see what number it is. But a simple setup. It'll stay probably in the 80s in there, which is good for preventing damping off, which is a disease that can hit seedlings. And like I said, I've got the little timer here, and I'll just plug that in. You can see the light go on. And then we just close this. Another thing that I will do is put a blanket or something over the top of it to add some insulation value. And then usually in, between 3 and 7 days or so, these seedlings will start to pop up. And as soon as I see signs of some germination, I will take the whole flat out and start putting it into the cold frame outside. So there it is, a low watt energy efficient system for heating your seedling trays that doesn't require you to go out and buy a heat mat for each one. You can do a large quantity all at once. So once the seeds have germinated in the germination chamber, I will put them outside in the cold frame, or if it's too cold outside still, I will put them under a fluorescent light fixture, and I sort of have a setup that I built several years ago to hold up the fluorescent light fixture and allow it to be raised as the plants grow. So the advantage of the cold frame is that there's plenty of space in it. I only have this one light fixture, and also I have limited power in the late winter, so I don't want to have a lot of fluorescent light fixtures on for so long. If I have enough flats, I might have to use my windowsills, and obviously that's not ideal because you want your seedlings to get full light from all around, and the fluorescent light fixture provides that, and the cold frame provides that as well. But the windowsill, you're only going to get light from one direction, and your plants tend to get pretty lanky and what's called etiolated as they search for more light.
One important thing to remember about these flats of soil blocks is that it's best to bottom water them, because if you water from the top, you're going to be washing all the soil away from the soil blocks, and they're going to gradually degrade over time. So you want to make sure that you drop your flats into an empty flat that will hold water. You're just going to let them sit there in that flat to soak up the water, and that way it's a gentle watering. There's no disturbance of the soil at all, and these soil blocks should, in 10-15 minutes, soak up as much water as they're going to soak up. Well, I hope that was helpful for you and gave you some new ideas for how you can make your garden starts more sustainable and successful in the springtime. Don't forget to share and like the video, give it a thumbs up, and also don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't done that. Thanks for watching.
For thousands of years, people used the thermal mass of the earth to store and preserve their food for a longer part of the season. And in concert with things like smoking and salting, they were able to create a lot of unique foods and flavors. And these are the foods and flavors that we have as a major part of our diet. All the crazy fancy foods that you can think of that are highly valued, the cheeses, the wines, the pickles, the whatever you can think of, the charcuterie, all of those things, those flavors